October 31st, 1996, Halloween, and also the release date for a creepy, obscure PC game called Drowned God: Conspiracy of the Ages. Given the fact that the game was released over 20 years ago, it has since been defined as abandonware. It's actually hard to find the game, let alone play it. It was the conspiracy nuts' dream. It featured primitive 3D graphics, sci-fi inspired characters that all play a part in various well-known myths, such as the Bermuda Triangle, alien autopsies, the Illuminati, you name it. If you weren't already scared by the premise of this video, you'd at least find this Drowned God game pretty intriguing. You'd think that the minds behind this game were eccentric individuals, questioning, inquisitive minds. Others would find this video game the work of lunatics. But this is a story that takes a turn for the absolute worse, a nightmarish end to all the intrigue, which would occur 11 years after the release of the game, that led to the deaths of multiple people. January 10th, 2007. A vicious crime scene was discovered. One male with 47 stab wounds, large gashes across his arms, and even more brutal and mysterious, his genitals were mutilated. A second victim was discovered, held tightly in the arms of the deceased male, a woman who'd also been stabbed over 30 times. So much so, the murder weapon was left broken inside her body. A secondary knife was found. To say the scenes were horrific is putting it lightly. This was clearly overkill. There was also a hint of fatal romance at play, given the final position of the bodies holding one another. Not far from these two murders were pets, a dog and a cat that had also been stabbed during the rampage. The doctor in charge of the autopsies couldn't even bring himself to work for a couple of days, stating that it was the worst thing he'd ever seen. The authorities didn't have to look far in order to identify the culprit, as the deceased male within the crime scene was seen as an eccentric individual. His name was Richard Horn, aka Harry Horse. Richard was a jack of all trades who'd worked on various forms of media, serving as an author, an illustrator, and a game designer. The woman lying on Richard's deceased body was his wife, Mandy. Putting two and two together, the investigation concluded that Richard had gone into a crazed and delusional state, killing his wife, his dog, his cat, and himself shortly after. But there was no real way of knowing what led to such a horrible scene. Others were led to believe that the married couple killed themselves, along with their pets, in a suicidal pact. The third, even more grievous theory was that they'd been killed by an unknown third party. But this was hardly ever followed up on. I think all of these scenarios clearly show a side of eerie mystery that surrounded these events. One thing is absolute fact. Richard, aka Harry Horse, 11 years prior to his death and the slaying of his family, had scripted, designed, wrote, and ultimately created a video game, The Drowned God: Conspiracy of the Ages. Well, it seemed as though Richard had found himself in a conspiracy of his own making. Where did it all go wrong for Richard?
Monday, the 2nd of August. Animation director Alan and producer Marion are travelling to Scotland to meet Harry Horse.
Hello. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Harry. And this must be Rue.
Hello. Great.
Good.
I find this video haunting and somewhat confusing. The man being interviewed is Richard Horn, or Harry Horse, as he'd been referred to in the video, and there is a peacefulness to the way he responds to the questions, even bringing his dog Rue along. It's a beautiful day, and Richard seems pretty passionate about his upcoming animated film. Richard shows his close connection with his dog Rue, even getting Rue to bark on command.
You could make Rue bark?
I can.
You can? You
I
sure?
can. Rue, bark. Bark. Bark.
Oh,
What's
yes.
happening?
He even made Rue a protagonist within the film. And that's what makes Richard's eventual demise all the more mysterious, seeing how close he was with animals in a mild-mannered sort of way. It's almost unthinkable to see him slaying his pets, but human behavior is unpredictable at best. How much was Richard hiding? What was buried underneath his light-hearted manner and affection? I won't pretend to be some kind of expert. As a simple spectator myself, I just find it jarring to see this guy lovingly play with his dog, knowing the insane brutality he'd commit in the years ahead. All we can really do is stick to what's out there. Later in the interview is possibly the most intriguing clip, and it's only a couple of seconds long. Richard and his wife Mandy, along with Rue, head towards a lake. An extremely haunting image, knowing what their fate entails. Of course, there's no better way to explain a person's mind than to showcase their art. This interview is based on Richard's animated film, The Last Polar Bear, a coming-of-age kids cartoon. And here is Richard's previous, more nefarious work, The Drowned God.
Oh, but am I rude? My little cabbage head. I'm a cat and the world's my rat.
You can obviously see the broad scope of difference between the two works, but more than that, you can see Richard's demeanor clearly change in both interviews. Obviously, this is tied to the subject matter. An interview about a creepy conspiracy game is going to feature a darker attitude, along with the lighting, when compared to a children's film interview. But seeing the change is more so a symbolic foreshadowing. You can hardly see Richard's face, only one of his eyes are visible. It's as if we're now seeing his darker side, a passionate individual all around, and yet he wore many masks. But what exactly was he preaching? Richard had a tendency of including real-life relatives and loved ones into his works. For example, the protagonist in The Last Polar Bear was based on his grandfather, who was also a writer. In The Drowned God, the protagonist has found a special device that grants them the forbidden knowledge of mankind's creation, as well as the ability to view their past lives through their player's ancestors. An interesting premise, but this is a dead giveaway into the mind of Richard. There's a reason why Richard uses the name Harry Horse. Harry Horse was the name of an actual poet from the 1800s, who shared no relation to Richard. But he ran with the name anyway, even creating a conspiracy that the two shared the same ideas behind the gods, among other origin stories. Essentially, Richard tried to piece this poet as his ancestor. Richard wanted to make it seem as though he had sacred knowledge of human origins. This would make him seem as though he was chosen to provide all of this forbidden knowledge through this point-and-click video game. And yes, if you take a look at the actual game itself, it's chock full of pretty wild theories and writing, scary and mysterious atmospheres. And don't even get me started about the monsters. These designs are chilling to say the least. But here's the thing, Richard was no special being with intimate knowledge. The Drowned God perfectly shows off his delusional side. And when reality began to finally sneak into Richard's life, he turned to violence. In 2004, his wife Mandy had been diagnosed with cancer. Love and care is what was ultimately needed for someone going through that diagnosis, as Mandy sadly lost her ability to walk and speak. For Richard, though, this was a situation not fit for a supposed chosen one. He'd throw fits of rage, allegedly punching holes into the wall of their Scotland home. In fact, the couple lost their home due to financial difficulties. Richard's work had stalled, enraging him even further. In short, the title Drowned God was very fitting for him. This is a situation that would drive even the strongest into a deep and dark depression. That's why news outlets had alleged that Richard and Mandy had committed suicide. According to Mandy's father, though, that was far from reality. Mandy was increasingly scared of Richard's anger, constantly wanting to be around her friends and hardly wanting to be alone with him. The night of the murder, Richard allegedly went around the streets, shouting, "It's a wonderful night for a killing." After the heinous act had been committed, Mandy was discovered with various defensive wounds. All of this information provided by Mandy's father pointed to that Mandy was the unfortunate victim to Richard's blind rage. But even he had close ones come to his defense. An actor friend of Richard's threw out the suggestion that the entire act was a cruel distortion. He believed that the couple were murdered, seeing as their door was left wide open. This of course led to the speculation that through Richard's ongoing parade of conspiracies, angered the wrong people. Obviously this was never truly followed up on, with hardly any leads to go by. What is certain, however, and what is clearly visible for all, is that there is a dark side to everyone. Conspiracies, ancient knowledge, and delusions was Richard's dark side. Add to that the way he'd killed himself, his cancer-ridden wife, and his pets. And yet, you can actually see him casually strolling by with the supposed people and animals that he loved. It is truly unnerving. If you or your loved ones are in need of psychiatric help, there are links provided in the description. Sometimes just asking if someone's okay isn't always enough, but there is help out there. Thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on this overall case. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more horror lore, lists, and mysteries. Have an awesome rest of your day, and as always, stay single.